Hong Kong finds itself between two great powers, as the United States pushes back against China's growing influence. And Hong Kong's role becomes even more complicated, as it is caught in the line of fire between the two nations. Here's Kishore Mahubani explaining how Hong Kong can work toward maintaining its current relationship with China and still act independently in its own best interests.
As a friend of Hong Kong, what can you advise us? Do we need to develop politically savvy individuals? We just don't. Civil servants are not meant to be politicians. They did not have the training. In fact, they were prevented from touching politics under the British. And after 1997, they are thrown into the lion's cage and they have to become politicians. And it's very, very tough. Both the ones like Six Tong, who were brought in from the outside, or the civil servants. Do we have a chance of producing great brains like Singapore does in geopolitics?
Well, I think you're right when you say that Hong Kong didn't have to go through any struggles. You made a peaceful transition from the end of British colonial rule to becoming a part of China. But I can tell you one thing, in case you're all bored, the next 10 years will be very exciting for Hong Kong, because you have become a key political football in one of the greatest contests of all time, in the contest between the United States and China. So Hong Kong will be kicked around, as a football in this game. So I would say that if ever there was a time for Hong Kong to develop geopolitical reflexes, it is now. You must actually understand the forces that are operating against Hong Kong. And there are various things you can do, by the way.
Such as?
Number one, I'm not sure whether you have put together, it doesn't have to be a public declaration, at least have somewhere in the Hong Kong government a small private think tank that tries to monitor the great big geopolitical game that is being played between the US and China and how it's going to affect Hong Kong. So you must at least have a team studying all the moves and the consequences.
The last CE of Hong Kong dismantled that. He ended the CPU, which is a Central Policy Unit. So we're going the wrong direction. What's number two?
Now, number two, I would say, you're right, you're part of China. But remember, it is not one country, one system. It's one country, two systems. And what you need to emphasize is not just how you are part of China, which you are, but also how different you are from China, right? You have the British legal system, and you're clearly not a Chinese city in the way that a city in China is. And what you can do to help deflect the geopolitical pressure coming towards you is to emphasize that you are different and that you are, in a sense, you're part of China, but also have a different system. And as a result of that, at a time when American politicians are trying to isolate and bring down Hong Kong, you can become a magnet for global talent. And the global talent will come here because they're, on the one hand, interested in China, which is frankly still the world's fastest growing economy overall in many ways, and at the same time want to live in a place that is close to China and yet also different. So at a time when many of the major Western countries are shutting their doors to global talent, United States is, Donald Trump wants to close the border, even Canada, the world's most open country, Justin Trudeau just announced he's going to raise immigration barriers. So that, there's a tremendous amount of human talent in the world. So just as I was a young boy in a coffee shop with no hope of going to university, but I ended up going to university and then succeeding. There are lots of young people like me in the world who are looking for opportunities. And Hong Kong can attract that global talent. And if you can do so, if you become a magnet for global talent, then frankly, that will create a self-reinforcing virtuous circle that will strengthen Hong Kong.
You use a phrase that in passing, that I don't know if, ladies and gentlemen, you guys pick it up. I did. And the reason I pick it up is because it's exactly the same thing I've been saying for the last couple of years, and I find no resonance among my friends in Hong Kong. You said that U.S. is trying to bring down Hong Kong. We are collateral damage. We're not the main target. But in order to hit Beijing, you hit Beijing's son, so to speak. And hence, you give Hong Kong hell, especially as a financial service center. If America doesn't hit you hard in that area, I think America is asleep, and America is not asleep. And yet, what I'm afraid is, Hong Kong people are asleep. Hong Kong government is asleep. And by the way, we are more left than the Beijing leaders, it seems, to be more like them, so to speak, rather than emphasizing, as you have proposed, the uniqueness of the two systems. Now, in the old days when Anson Chan used to propose one country, two system, to the neglect of the one country, I was the first one against her. Now I'm saying that times have changed. Yes, we respect 100%, 150% the one country. But this is the time that we also, I have to borrow a page from Anson Chan, not exactly, to emphasize the two system as well. So I think that Hong Kong is undergoing a lot of changes at this stage.
I think what Hong Kong needs to develop is a very high degree of sophistication in its understanding of geopolitical developments. And it's important for Hong Kong society also to develop that kind of understanding, because these are the forces that will be shaking you. I mean, you put up all these warnings, typhoon warnings, right? I mean, it's good, you should, right? You should have a geopolitical typhoon warning also. And put it up on the street and say, hey, a geopolitical storm is coming. And that geopolitical storm, believe me, can do more damage than your Typhoon Yagi can do. So, but you got to develop, therefore, the antenna, the capacity to understand what is going on, what is the game that is being played. And that, frankly, was the best legacy that the leaders of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, and Raja Arnam, left behind in Singapore. Because Singapore, when it comes to geopolitics, is one of the best performers in the world. Because we know how to manage all the great powers. In fact, even as you and I are sitting in this room talking, I was just on CNBC from 11:30 a.m. to 12 noon talking about the visit of Prime Minister Modi to Singapore. You know, and Singapore is such a small country, and yet many of the world leaders come to Singapore to interact with Singapore. So clearly we know how to engage the great powers and how to deal with them. And that's something also that Hong Kong can and should develop now.
I can assure you, Kishore, Hong Kong does not have those kind of talents. If anybody know anything along that line, it's already in this room, because they are my friends. And I am amateur, they are amateur. Are there people in Singapore we can engage to advise us, help us? Can you give us a few names, at least half as good as Kishore Mahubani? Are there such people?
No. I mean, this is actually something that you have to struggle with yourself. I mean, you know why? If you don't feel the struggle yourself, you won't be able to understand the consequences that flow from it. So you have to develop it internally, and sometimes you will succeed, you will make mistakes, but it's actually the process of making mistakes is when you learn from what you do. So Singapore clearly has made lots of mistakes too, but it's from the mistakes that we learn what we did right and what we did wrong.
You know, Kishore, you and I agree that the world is a very cruel place. You said something in your book, page 85 or something, that Tommy Coe disagree, but I'm with you on that point. That is, the international arena is a jungle. There are laws, there are rules, tribunals, and conventions, and this and that. But they are only there as tools of the major powers. And it is very much a jungle, as you have described. But Singapore, on the other hand, was able to do things that are against the bigger boys. And you do things that are politically incorrect. And Lee Kuan Yew didn't give a damn about it. And he insisted on it. For example, Singapore's educational system, while educating every man and woman as much as possible, they also are very elitist. Today, in much of the world, including Hong Kong, if you were to use the word elite, that we are the elitist, we train elites, you will be banished. And Singapore is able to do that. Has Singapore lost that edge today because you are now wealthy? Or are you still bucking the trend, pushing the envelope, in doing what makes sense, frankly, common sense, and hence succeeding?
Well, I think the good thing about Singapore is that we have in some ways made a very important transition. Well, in the early years, we succeeded because we had very strong, exceptional leaders, as I mentioned. And you know, we've had, I must say, this is unusual, by the way. I mean, if you look at the United Kingdom, for example, you look at the recent prime ministers. I mean, Boris Johnson was a joker. His successor, Liz Truss, was a joke. I mean, you can see, therefore, if a country like UK has difficulty producing great prime ministers, Singapore has been very fortunate. You know, we've only had 4 prime ministers and 4 exceptionally competent prime ministers. Very different,
Agree,
but very successful in their own way. But this also reflects the fact that over time, as we have developed, we have also developed strong institutions in Singapore now. So, for example, in the early days when we started off, when I joined the foreign ministry, there must have been about 15 or 20 people in the foreign ministry. Now there are over 1,000, I believe, diplomats that we have. So we have grown significantly, and we have developed the institutional bench strength, plus what you might call muscle memory. So we remember episodes and how we handle crisis. I mean, in my book, I describe what happened when Mr. Lee Kuan Yew very bravely decided to expel an American diplomat in the 1980s. Now that's amazing. In those days, the United States was clearly by far the most important country in the world. Singapore was a little tiny dot, red dot, and we decided to expel an American diplomat. And that obviously is a very risky thing to do. But if you read my book, you'll see how Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was very careful in the way that he managed the whole thing. And he could, as Giorgio once said, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew is a man who can unleash a political storm and pull back a political storm.
wow,
Now that takes incredible skill, by the way. Incredible. Lee Kuan Yew had that, right? But now we have developed the institutional bench strength that replaces some of these things.
Before opening to the floor, can you give us a summary of how you see the world today in no more than 5 minutes? You said that Hong Kong will have a hard time in the coming 10 years. I agree. And you said somewhere else that China will have a lot of challenges in the next 10 to 20 years because of the United States, hitting on China.
Yeah.
But can you tell us what you think, how it may end? Number one. Number two, what about some of the other major players in the world, like Russia, like Indonesia, like India, Japan? Can you say a few words?
Well, actually, to give you a decent answer, I must follow Fidel Castro and give you a 3-hour speech now. No, but I think if you give me 5 minutes, the thing that the key point I want to emphasize to everybody is, I'm very glad that I'm alive today, because I think you're going to see incredible changes over the next 10 years. The world is changing fundamentally on many fronts, okay? Right? I've spoken about the end of the era of Western domination of world history. That's happening as we speak. The return of Asia, that's happening as we speak. And all this is creating a whole new world order. Now, if I want to give a very brief summary of this world order, I describe it as a 3M world. 3M is not the company in Minnesota. But 3M stands for one, multi-civilizational.
Multi-civilization.
So because they're with the end of Western domination of world history, there are many successful civilizations in the world, including the Sinic and Indic civilizations, China and India rising clearly. And then number two, it's multipolar. So you used to have very clear centers of power, one or two centers of power. Now, you're moving in a world where there are many independent poles, and even some of the middle powers can assert themselves and behave completely independently of the great powers. So the capacity of the great powers to control the game in the way that they could in the past is diminishing.
Can you give examples?
Well, I give you an example. In theory, Turkey is a NATO ally and should be listening to United States and should be, compliant with United States. But Erdogan is completely independent. He maintains his separate relationship with
Russia,
Vladimir Putin, and he takes the independent positions on many issues. So that's one example, but there are many other such examples. I'll give you another example. Even as we speak, it's quite amazing. The Malaysian Prime Minister has decided to go to Moscow. Now, I'm sure that it's going to anger the United States and Europe, but he's saying, I'm an independent leader. I will do what I want to do. So the sense of agency that the middle powers have is more than it was in the past. And the third M is multilateral. And so you will see that as we live in a small global village, where we live, everything is interdependent and we have to work together. In a small global village, you need global village councils, and therefore multilateral institutions, whether it's the United Nations, G20, or even regional multilateral institutions like ASEAN. Multilateralism is going to become stronger and stronger in the world.